Hi, you're watching Deasy Gemstones YouTube channel, and this is lesson 3 of the Colored Gemstone Academy, and I'm glad you joined me today. Lesson 3 is where we really get into the nuts and bolts of what a colored gemstone is and what's the difference between organic and inorganic, and just a whole bunch of fun stuff. And stick around towards the end of this class as well. You know, I like to have a little discussion on a gemstone. I'll talk a little bit about one of my favorites, inorganic gemstones, and of course you'll know what that means after this class. This is abalone shell, so stick around for a little discussion on that at the end of this lesson. Okay, so lesson 3 begins with a very simple question. What is a colored gemstone? And simply put, a colored gemstone is any gem material that is not a diamond. I know that sounds kind of crazy and kind of funny because a gem is a diamond, but gemstones, colored gemstones and diamonds are considered two completely different categories. In fact, if you take the the Accredited Joy Professional course with the Gemological Institute of America, there are 3 courses that comprise that degree. One is called Colored Gemstone Essentials, another one is called Diamond Essentials, and the third is called Jewelry Essentials. So a diamond, someone who cuts a diamond is called a diamond cutter, and that's a completely different skill set than somebody who cuts colored gemstones, and they're called a lapidary. Not that you need to know all of those words, but colored gemstones are completely different than diamonds. I won't cover anything really about diamonds in the course except what I just said right there. Now, within the colored gemstone realm, there are basically 2 types of colored gemstones. One would be called organic. Now, organic is a very short list of gems, and they come from a living thing, either a plant or an animal. This is basically what is going to be comprised of what an organic gemstone is. Amber, which is fossilized tree sap, 35 to 70 million years old. Bone, as you know, that's kind of obvious. Copal, which is actually a younger form of amber. Some people are selling copal as amber. I don't think that that's really should ever be in the same breath. This is like maybe a tree that's 100 years old versus 35 to 75 million years old. Coral, those living coral reefs that are at the bottom of oceans and seas. Jet, which is fossilized coal that didn't become a diamond. Pearls, or mother of pearl, which is the nacre that's created in a sea creature. Shell, like the abalone shell that I talked about, we would be discussing at the end of this. Wood, so yes, even wood can be jewelry, and wood and bone was jewelry very, very much in primitive cultures and primitive times. And then ivory. Now this is something that bears a little bit of discussion because trading in ivory of living things is illegal. It is banned in pretty much every country, and you hear stories about poachers. On the other hand, something like fossil ivory from a woolly mammoth, or actually there was something I thought was incredibly interesting when Judy and I were at the Tucson Gem Show one year. There was a company that made jewelry out of old piano keys. So that was obviously ivory from a long time ago, and that would not be covered under what's illegal in the trade of ivory. So yeah, old piano keys are made out of ivory, and old piano keys are now being made into jewelry. And then there's the inorganic. So again, everything is either an organic or inorganic gemstone. So everything except these ones I listed here, like crystals and rocks, would be covered in what is an inorganic gemstone. Pretty clear? Everybody with me so far? Okay, to continue, and I've made kind of reference to this after lesson 2, there are 3 traits that all gemstones must exhibit. And they are as follows: beauty, rarity, and durability. Beauty, rarity, and durability. Now beauty is to me the most personal of them, because What's to say? There's a saying that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So you might think a gemstone is really, really pretty, and I might think, well, maybe not so much. It's not my favorite. I always tell you throughout the years what are my favorite gemstones, and so beauty, rarity, and durability. Beauty, I think I love to make it very simple. If you love the look of a gemstone and you can afford it, that's pretty much all you need to know. It's like drinking a fine wine. I can find some fine wines that are $14.95 that taste every bit as good as a $150 or $200 bottle of wine. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with me. It means I just shouldn't pay more than I need to for the gemstone. So beauty is definitely a personal. That's in the eye of the beholder. Rarity. That's a little bit more well defined. There are certain gems that are much, much more rare than others. If you take a look at one of the most common gemstones on planet Earth, it would be quartz. There are more gems associated with quartz than probably any other category of gemstones out there. A lot of people think, well, what would be something that's really rare? A lot of people think, well, diamonds, man, they're like really, really rare. Actually, diamonds aren't so rare. Now, getting a D-color flawless diamond would be exceptionally rare, but diamonds are actually, there's an abundance of diamonds. But you look at something like, actually I'm going to reach back and show you this, something like Larimar, and you hear about Larimar as that stone in the Dominican Republic. It's actually one of the rarer gems that I ever present. And the reason is there is literally 1 kilometer square that this material, which is blue pectolite, has ever been found naturally on planet Earth. And that's in a place in the Dominican Republic called the Barahona province. And when you think about 1 kilometer square, that's basically a little over half a mile. Now, contrast that with another gemstone that people consider to be very rare, which is tanzanite. I've been to the tanzanite mines, and that probably covers a 30 or 40 kilometer square area. So you think about something like that, the rarity of the Larimars could be considered 30 to 40 times more rare than what you see in tanzanite. Now, all of these are going to go into what makes a stone valuable, and I'll get into that, each of them, as I go through each of the categories of the gemstones. But then the final one is durability. Now, everybody probably understands hardness. You heard everybody say, how hard is this gemstone? Is one gem harder than another? The answer is yes, but there's 2 other very important factors. One is called toughness, and one is called stability. Now, let's start with the hardness. There is a scale that you've probably all heard about called the Mohs scale of hardness. And it was developed by a guy by the name of Frederick Mohs, who was a mineralogist. And it was really kind of a crude test, because basically what it said was, what stone will scratch another stone? It really didn't go into too much detail, but for the purposes of the class, I wanted to show you something. This is the Mohs scale, and it goes from 1 to 10. 1 being talc, 2 gypsum, 3 calcite, 4 fluorite, 5 apatite. What's this? Oh, the orthorhombic stones, the quartz stones, topaz, and then corundum, and then finally the diamond. Now, the diamond is harder than any other gemstone that we knew of at the time when that scale was developed. But it really was, what can one do and scratch another stone? So this didn't tell you a whole lot about their relative hardness. And plus, you couldn't really tell how's the hardness compare to something like iron or steel. So another scale was developed called the Vickers scale of hardness, and it really took into account, it was much, much more scientific than the Mohs scale. So taking a look at this, you'd think of, well, okay, so corundum and diamond, well, it's one harder. No, it's really not. It doesn't work that way. And this is where Vickers can help us. So I drew a little scale here. And believe it or not, I did that myself. And this is the scale from 0 to 10,000 in Vickers hardness. And this is a scale from 0 to 10 in the Mohs scale of hardness. just to show you how this is. So here's it is just above 0 for talc. Maybe you're at 100 or 200 for gypsum on the Vickers scale. Calcite still down here, fluorite way down here. You really only get to about 2,000 or just above 2,000 or 1,000 when you get to quartz. When you get to topaz, you're about 1,500. Corundum, you're about 2,000 on the Vickers scale. And then look at the diamond, all the way up here. It's 4 to 5 times harder than a sapphire or ruby. So that's why I say the Mohs scale is good, and it's great to understand that that was developed and when it was developed, but it doesn't really tell you the story about hardness. So that's hardness. It's literally defined as the ability for a gemstone to withstand scratching. That's it. That's only one element of the durability of a gemstone. The next one is called toughness. Now, what's the difference between hardness and toughness? Well, toughness is the ability for a gem to withstand cracking and chipping altogether. So toughness, I'll give you an example. A diamond is very hard, but in fact, the hardest natural gemstone we can think of. But it's not tough. And the reason I say diamonds, it will withstand scratching from almost any other gemstone on Earth, but it is not tough. That means it can chip. And the way that they used to cut diamonds, you could cleave off an entire face of a diamond. So it does not withstand that cracking and chipping the same way that other gemstones might. Now, on the other hand, when you're talking about toughness, take a look at jade, like a jadeite jade. Jade's not very hard. It's going to be around 7 on the Mohs scale of hardness, but it is considered exceptional on the toughness scale. And that's why, in fact, it is the toughest gemstone substance we know of. And that's why you'll see so many gems in jade that are carved, like carved Buddha statues. I've even seen furniture carved out of jade, out of big pieces of jade. That's because it's very, very tough, but not very hard. Relatively easy to carve, but it won't chip and crack off when you do it. But that's why you don't see diamonds that are carved into Buddhas like that. So that's hardness and toughness. Another really great way to remember this is I think about 2 types of candy. If you think of peanut brittle, which is delicious, and you dropped it on the floor, it would shatter probably into 1,000,000 pieces. It is hard. You can't really scratch it, but it's not tough. Now, if you take like a caramel, like a piece of candy, which is kind of pliable and malleable, and you drop that on the floor, nothing much is going to happen. You can actually twist it into different shapes, so it's tougher, but not hard at all. I know this is kind of a simple example, but it might help you remember that. And then we get to this tricky little one called stability. So we know about hardness, now we've learned about the toughness, but what does it mean for a gemstone to be stable? Well, stability is the gemstone's ability to withstand light, heat, and chemicals, exposure to light, heat, and chemicals. Some gems are very susceptible to heat. In fact, there are many gemstones that you know of that are heat treated to improve the color that the eye sees. So that would be heat. Some are really, really susceptible to heat. And one of those would be kunzite. Now, kunzite's a beautiful gemstone. You can get it in relatively big pieces. But even prolonged exposure to sunlight can alter the color of a kunzite. So the reason you need to know about stability, about light, heat, and chemicals, it's just another way to find out how durable your gemstone is, but also what cleaning agents you should be using when you're trying to clean your jewelry. And I'll talk about that in another chapter, but that's the hardness, toughness, and stability. And this is at Vickers versus the Mohs scale of hardness. And then we get into one of my favorite parts of gemstones, the 4 C's. Everybody who's ever probably shopped for a diamond has heard about the 4 C's, the color, the cut, the clarity, the carat weight, all of those things are very, very important when you're evaluating the worth or the value of a gemstone. So the 4 C's we know of color, cut, clarity, carat weight. Now notice I put color first. And most of the times when you're talking to someone who deals in diamonds, they're going to talk about cut, color, clarity, carat weight. Well, I put color first because in a colored gemstone, it is the most important thing. Cut, that's the most important thing in a diamond because there are certain ratios that a diamond has to be cut and percentages, because with a diamond you're looking to return the most light back to the eye. So in colored gemstones, this is something I said, I put a big asterisk here because I think that every gem show I've ever done on a shopping channel, and I've been doing that for over 30 years, I talk about, this is the exact verbiage I use. It's not like it came from someone else. I use it every single time. Color is the single most important factor in colored gemstones. It is the single most important defining characteristic. It affects the quality, the rarity, and ultimately the price that you pay for that gemstone. Now, what I love about this, that color is the most important thing in a colored gemstone, and we go back to beauty as something that all gemstones have: beauty, rarity, and durability. Color. If you like the color of a gemstone and it pleases you and you can afford it, that's really all you need to know. I'm going to get a little bit ahead of myself when I talk about color, and we're going to end on color today with one more. Let me just get to it right now. But remember, if you learn nothing else from this class, color is the single most important defining characteristic that affects the value of a gemstone. Okay, so we'll do color today, and we'll save cut and clarity and carat weight for lesson 4. How about that? Because I don't want to go too long. Color. So the obvious question becomes, what causes color in a gemstone? Now, I don't want to be very clinical with you because that can be really, really boring. But basically, it's something called selective absorption. Selective absorption. And the way I'm going to describe it, and I'm going to very, very much simplify it. And you see that I've written these colors in color on here. It's probably too light. This is red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and purple. So those of you that are familiar with those colors, if you see a rainbow, those are the colors of the visible spectrum of white light. So white light is actually an amalgamation of a lot of different colors, and it's broken down into these basic colors. So why do you see certain colors in gemstones and other colors in other gemstones? Well, basically, it's that selective absorption. There are elements in these minerals that when light hits them, it will absorb some colors, which you won't see, and it will reflect other colors back to the eye. And that's why there's a whole plethora of different shades and colors of beautiful gemstones, but it's that selective absorption that the light travels at certain speeds, and when it gets into that gemstone, it will absorb some of them and reflect others. That's a selective absorption. I'll give you a great example of this. If you think of pure corundum, corundum is what gives us rubies and sapphires. Pure corundum would actually be colorless. So why do we see blue or green or yellow sapphires and then rubies that are red? Well, basically, it has to do with what's called trace elements. Now, almost every gemstone will have certain trace elements within the stone. In the case of a ruby, the most prominent trace element is chromium. If you didn't have chromium, you wouldn't see that red color of a ruby. Now remember, rubies and sapphires are exactly the same gemstone material, but they have different trace elements. If they have a preponderance of ruby, you're going to see the red, and that's a ruby of the chromium. If you're looking at a sapphire, what you're seeing is a lot of iron and titanium, and those trace elements make that blue color of a sapphire. But again, just as an aside, corundum can appear in virtually every color. It's a ruby or it's a sapphire. If it's a red, it is called a ruby. If it's pink or any other color, it's called a sapphire. Now I'm going to close this lesson on a question I get asked a million times in my 30-year career. Well, I guess it's over 30 years now. What color is best? Or what color of amethyst should I buy? I wrote about this in my book because I get questions like that all of the time. And my answer is always the same. I can't tell you what color to buy. I can tell you what color or what characteristics might make one shade of amethyst more valuable than another. But there are some people out there that really love a light lavender color of quartz, lavender quartz or pink amethyst, they call it. And that's fine. Other people want that really, really deep saturated Welch's grape jelly color of amethyst. And I say the same thing. Listen, if you like the lighter amethyst, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with preferring that. All you need to know is that you would need to pay less for that than you would for that really deep saturated color. Actually, I have my geode here. This would be a good place to close it because this is too heavy. I'm going to bring it right up here. This is a little bit of a lighter color. It's not quite the pink. It's a purple, but it's not really deeply saturated. And I have now another little mini geode. And you can see how much deeper and darker and richer that color is. No, it's even not the darkest amethyst I've ever seen. But that would be a little bit more valuable than the lighter color that you saw in the big geode here. So that's really going to wrap it up on lesson 3. Remember, stick around. We're going to talk a little bit more about my little shell discussion, abalone shell. But this is lesson 3. If you like what you're hearing, share with your friends, and also look at the bottom and you'll see something called subscribe, and you can subscribe to this channel. And up on the top corner of your screen you might see a little bell. If you click on that, you will get notifications when the next class will drop, which will be lesson 4. Now if you missed lesson 1 and 2, they're still available on this channel. Just look them up under the playlist and you can see them. So I hope you enjoyed yourself. I certainly have a lot of fun educating you on gemstones. This is the Paul Deasy Gemstone YouTube channel and the Color Gemstone Academy. See you next time. Well, I hope you enjoyed lesson 3 of the Color Gemstone Academy at Paul Deasy Gemstones YouTube channel. And as promised, I'm going to give you a little bit of a seminar on one of my favorite gems, one of those unsung heroes, and it's called abalone shell. Before we get into that, you're going to notice I had a wardrobe change. I also took this party outside. Why? Well, because last week I was able to show you through the magic of video an actual working mine in Nevada called the Pristine Mine. Well, there's no really mine except for water where all of these shells come from. So let's talk a little bit about shell and why I love it so much. First of all, it's incredibly affordable. You don't have to spend a lot of money. Even something as simple as this. I think when we were going on our cruise to Hawaii, they just handed this to us when we got on the ship. Not that we didn't pay a lot for the cruise, but probably on a cruise ship or in a porter call, it's gonna be what, a couple of bucks? It's a shell, okay? That's one example of something. I showed you this before, and this is one of my absolute favorite gemstones because there's only a couple of other things that will give you that kind of almost the look of color play of an opal, and that would be an opal or a black opal or an ammonite shell. So just as an example, I'm going to give you a look at my actual cufflinks that I made out of white crystal opal. You can see that play of color. These are very expensive. Or if you were getting something like an ammonite shell, I don't have one to show you, but I'm going to pop a picture up there. And the ammonite shell comes from Western Canada, little parts of the United States. Very rare, very expensive. Something that you wanted to do in this size in an ammonite shell, that could set you back probably $1,000 or maybe even more than that, because that's a big surface area. If you have something like this in a black opal, and this is an example in my opal book of a black opal. That's a black opal that was mined in Nevada. And if you get a lightning ridge black opal and the size of that pendant that I just showed you, that could be tens of thousands of dollars for something like that. So I really like the idea of the ammonite shell. Now where do where does the abalone shell come from? The abalone shell comes from Australia, sometimes they call them PAL shells, New Zealand, or off the coast of the United States. And again, this isn't a great example of an abalone shell. What does that look like in jewelry? Well, I showed you the ring, which I'll give you a closer look of that a little bit later. And the pendant that I was displaying for you, look how beautiful that is. I mean, that just is amazing for the cost of what you're getting. Okay, so that's one example of a shell. Shell, remember, is an organic gemstone. Now the ammonite shell, I already talked about that. That's made in jewelry. Usually it's in a triplet form, and that comes from mainly from Canada. And then you get the cameos, and if you've seen cameo shells, they're kind of coming back in popularity where it looks like it's kind of layered. This is the kind of shell that they use for the cameos, and the reason is you can see the different colors, how it goes from kind of a pink to a white, and that's how they get that layered look in cameos of having like a raised woman's profile on a pink shell. And that most of your cameos are going to be cut at the cutting center, so that would be in the country of Italy. They're very adept at that. So that's another way to enjoy your shell jewelry. Then there's the conch. We've all seen conchs that look like this, either ornamental on a shelf, which is kind of fun, or that you can string them together, smaller ones like this, in that piece of jewelry that I showed you before. The cameos are basically coming from something called a helmet shell, and that's in the West Indies and off the coast of Madagascar. So I think I told you where most of the shells are being harvested for you to enjoy. Now let's talk a little bit more about the durability of a shell. Now the big advantage, as we talked about, is it's very affordable. But it's a good thing it's very affordable because it's not the most durable gemstone out there. If you look at the Mohs scale of hardness, it's going to be a 3.5. That means it can scratch rather easily, certainly by other gemstones. Then we go to the toughness test. Well, how tough is it? Well, it's not very tough either. It's rated fair on the toughness scale. And you know that if I took and I dropped this shell, it's probably going to bust into 1,000,000 pieces. So not the toughest of gemstones. And then we ask about stability. Remember, that's its ability to withstand exposure to heat, light, and chemicals. Well, it doesn't do very well on any of those either. If we took this ring and we took a jeweler's torch to it, and you can see this is one that's actually capped. I'll talk about the doublets in a second. That shell would blacken when it's exposed to a flame. So it doesn't do really great with heat. What about sunlight? Well, not so bad, but a lot of the shells, especially in mother of pearl, which is another type of shell, it's the shell it's the nacre that lines the shell of a mollusk. And sometimes they will dye those to be black or peach or orange. And if they are exposed, prolonged exposure to sunlight for a long time, it could have a tendency to fade. And then we get into exposure to chemicals. It's not going to do very well with acid whatsoever. So what do you need to know about your very affordable and very beautiful abalone shell? Well, number one, I would recommend a doublet. A lot of times when I'm designing jewelry around abalone shell, I understand that you want it to be durable more than maybe the shell is itself. So in a case of a ring like this, if you look at the top of this, you'll see that it's faceted. That is a quartz cap on top of a very thin layer of shell right there. So you're not really ever touching, or you're not ever burning the actual shell. It makes it much easier to take care of and to clean it. Now, like all of your care and cleaning, you have to be very careful with certain methods. And I say this with almost every gemstone that anybody's ever asked me about. And it is this. Ultrasonics, I hardly ever recommend them because they're not going to be great with all types of jewelry, and you might not know which ones are good and which ones are not. And also, the vibration in an ultrasonic could take a gem and over prolonged vibrations loosen it from the mounting. You don't want that to happen either. Yes, I know jewelers use ultrasonics, but that's because they can repair something on the spot if a stone does happen to fall out, and they know which ones it's safe for or not. Okay, what about steam cleaning? That became a big thing. Well, steam cleaning, remember, produces heat. So yeah, if you're doing a diamond A diamond is born in like 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. A little bit of a heat and a steam cleaner is not going to bother it, but it may not work well with many other gemstones. The old tried and true, you look at that blue liquid that you use to wash your dishes by hand, that's going to be safe on almost all of your gemstones, including your shell. But that's going to be the end of my mini seminar on the shells, especially the abalone shell, because I think it is an incredible, beautiful, and affordable gemstone. It doesn't cost you a lot of money, but it is absolutely always drop dead gorgeous. Well, I will see you next week for lesson 4 of the Color Gemstone Academy. We're getting into a little bit more of the cut and the clarity and the carat weight discussion of the 4 C's, maybe just 2 of the last 3 next week. If you like what you see, there's a little red dot there, a little button that says subscribe. Just click on that. And next to that will be a little bell icon once you subscribe. And it allows you to sign up just by clicking on it for notifications. So you will get notified when the next Color Gemstone Academy class is ready to view. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you next time. Bye.